The day I lost my job, I walked up the long stone driveway to my son's mansion with nothing but a worn-out suitcase in my hand and a heart full of hope. I had just been fired after decades of loyal work. My pockets were nearly empty, and I had nowhere else to go. I thought if there was ever a time when family should stand together, this was it. When Lucas opened the door, I expected at least a little concern in his eyes. Maybe a word of comfort. Maybe even a hug. Instead, he looked me up and down like I was some stranger begging for scraps. "Dad, what are you doing here?" he asked, his tone sharp, his smile more of a smirk than a welcome. I tried to stay calm. "I just need a place to stay for a little while. I'll figure things out soon. I thought maybe you could help me." For a moment he was silent, then he laughed. It wasn't the kind of laugh that lightens a room. It was cold, dismissive, the kind that makes your stomach twist. "You're just a worthless old fool," he said flatly, like my entire life amounted to nothing in his eyes. Then, without another word, he slammed the door in my face. I stood there, staring at the polished wood of that door, my chest tight, the words echoing in my ears. He didn't know that only hours earlier I had matched every number on a lottery ticket worth $8.5 million. He didn't know the father he had just humiliated was suddenly one of the richest men in the state. And in that moment, standing alone outside the mansion of my only son, I made a decision that would change both of our lives forever. Before everything fell apart, my life was simple, maybe even plain by some standards, but it was mine and I worked hard for it. For 34 years, I had been the shift supervisor at a manufacturing plant on the edge of town. I started there when I was just 24, fresh-faced and determined to provide for my wife, Claire. She was my high school sweetheart, the love of my life, the woman who taught me that even in the darkest moments, kindness mattered. We built a modest home together, a small 2-bedroom with a front porch that creaked when you stepped on the boards. It wasn't much, but every corner of that house held our memories. The smell of Claire's apple pie in the fall, the sound of her humming old country songs while she folded laundry, the way she always insisted on planting tulips in the front yard each spring, even though they never lasted long. That home was our castle, not because of its size, but because of the love we shared inside it. When Lucas was born, I thought my world was complete. He had Claire's eyes, sharp and bright, and a stubborn streak that reminded me of myself. I wanted him to grow up proud of his father. I wanted him to see that even if you never became rich, a man's worth came from hard work, loyalty, and love for his family. But life doesn't always unfold the way you imagine. Claire got sick when Lucas was in college. Cancer came like a thief in the night, and within a year I was standing by her grave, clutching my son's hand, trying to be strong for him while my own heart was breaking. After she was gone, Lucas grew more distant. He buried himself in business school, then into work, climbing ladders, chasing deals, surrounding himself with people who measured success in expensive cars and square footage. I hardly recognized him anymore. Still, I kept working at the factory. Day after day, year after year, I showed up at 6 a.m., checked the machines, assigned shifts, solved problems when production lines broke down. I thought loyalty meant something. I thought if I kept my head down and gave everything I had, the company would stand by me too. I was wrong. That morning, when they called me into the office, I thought maybe it was about overtime scheduling or another safety briefing. Instead, the plant manager, a man half my age who had been there barely 5 years, told me the company was moving in a new direction. He said my position was being eliminated, effective immediately. No pension adjustment, no severance, just a handshake and a forced smile that did nothing to soften the sting. I walked out of that office with my stomach hollow. My whole life had been built around that place. I had poured my energy, my time, and my loyalty into it, and in a single morning it was all gone. At 58, the chances of starting over were slim. Employers want youth, speed, fresh degrees, not men with worn hands and gray hair. I sat in my truck in the parking lot for nearly an hour, staring at the steering wheel, trying to figure out what to do next. Bills were waiting at home. The mortgage had been paid off, but utilities, groceries, and medical expenses for my bad knee still piled up each month. My savings were thin because I had spent most of what I had helping Lucas get through college, and then with his down payment on his first condo. I never begrudged him that. I thought that was what fathers were supposed to do. The only family I had left besides Lucas was Claire's sister Margaret and her son Daniel. They were good people, kind people, but I didn't want to be a burden on them. Margaret worked long hours as a nurse, and Daniel was just starting his own career as a teacher. I told myself they didn't need me showing up on their doorstep with my troubles. That left only one place to turn. Lucas, my son, my own flesh and blood. I told myself it wouldn't be for long. Just until I figured things out. He had plenty of space. The last time I drove past his mansion, I counted at least 6 bedrooms and 3 garages. Surely he could spare a room for his father, even for a short while. I rehearsed the words in my head as I drove toward his neighborhood. I reminded myself that he was still my son, that beneath the arrogance I sometimes saw, there was still the boy who once held my hand at his mother's grave. The drive felt longer than it was. When I pulled up to the gates, I stared at the house for a moment. White stone walls, glass windows stretching tall, the kind of place you'd expect to see in a magazine. I stepped out of my truck and adjusted the old suitcase that carried my clothes and a few belongings. My hands trembled, not from the weight, but from nerves. Pride is a heavy thing to swallow, and I was swallowing it whole just by standing there. I rang the bell and waited, hearing the faint echo of chimes through the massive doors. My heart pounded in my chest. I thought of Claire, and how she would have told me to hold my head high, to remember that asking for help from your own child isn't weakness, it's family. I took a deep breath and whispered to myself, "It's just temporary. He'll understand." Then the door opened, and everything I believed about family, loyalty, and love began to unravel. When the door swung open, Lucas stood there in a tailored shirt, sleeves rolled neatly to his elbows, a gold watch catching the sunlight on his wrist. He looked every bit the successful businessman he had always wanted to become. For a split second, I hoped he would break into a smile, welcome me in, maybe even ask if I was all right. Instead, his eyes narrowed as if he were trying to figure out why I was standing at his door at all. "Dad?" he said, his voice sharp, clipped. "What are you doing here?" I shifted my suitcase from one hand to the other, suddenly aware of how out of place I looked against the polished marble entryway behind him. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "I need a place to stay for a little while. I just lost my job today, it won't be long. I'll figure something out soon." Lucas's brow arched. For a moment, he just stared at me. Then he let out a short laugh, the kind that doesn't carry joy but scorn. "You lost your job? Dad, what are you doing showing up here like this? You can't just drop in expecting me to take you in." I swallowed hard, heat rising to my face. I'm not asking for much. Just a roof over my head while I get back on my feet. I've always been there for you. I thought, he cut me off. Always been there for me? You gave me a middle-class life in a small house and acted like hard work was the only thing that mattered. Look at me, Dad. Look at this place. I built this because I refused to settle. I refused to end up like you. His words landed like blows. My chest tightened as I tried to steady my breathing. I thought of Claire, of how she always believed in gentleness, in love, in lifting people up rather than tearing them down. I wished she could see her son now, though maybe it was better she couldn't. "Lucas," I said softly, "I worked my whole life to give you what I could. I sacrificed so you could go to college, so you could build this life. All I'm asking for is a little help, just until I find my footing again." His jaw tightened. He stepped closer, his tone colder now. That's the problem. You never aimed higher. You thought working a factory job was enough. You thought providing the basics was enough. You never taught me ambition. You never showed me what it meant to really succeed. And now you come here with your suitcase, expecting me to clean up your mess. I felt the blood drain from my face. A mess? Is that what you think I am? Lucas shrugged, his expression almost bored. You're nearly 60, jobless, no savings worth mentioning. What else should I call it? You're not an asset, Dad, you're a liability. The words hung heavy in the air. I stood on the porch, clutching my suitcase, fighting back the storm of anger and heartbreak building inside me. My son, the boy I had held when he cried, the boy I had worked double shifts to support, was standing there looking at me as if I were a stranger who had overstayed his welcome. I don't need you, he said flatly, and I don't want you here. You should have planned better. You should have thought about your future instead of expecting others to take care of you. I tried one last time. Lucas, I'm not asking you to take care of me. I'm asking you to remember I'm your father, he chuckled bitterly. A father? Fathers are supposed to set examples. You taught me how to be average. I had to unlearn that to get where I am. You're just a worthless old fool, Dad. That's all you've ever been. The words cut deeper than anything I had ever heard in my life. My chest felt tight, as if someone had reached inside and squeezed my heart. Before I could respond, Lucas slammed the door. The sound echoed through the quiet street, leaving me alone on the front step with my suitcase at my side. I stood frozen, staring at the polished wood in front of me, the sting of his words burning in my ears. My legs felt heavy, my hands numb. A neighbor across the street walked by with a dog, glancing in my direction before looking away quickly, as if embarrassed for me. I felt stripped of dignity, standing there like a beggar outside my own son's mansion. Slowly, I turned and walked back down the driveway. Each step felt heavier than the last. I thought of the nights I had stayed up with Lucas when he had nightmares, of the Christmas mornings when I saved for months just to buy him the toy he wanted, of the pride in his eyes the day he graduated. I thought of all the sacrifices, big and small, that I had made to give him the life he now used as a weapon against me. Anger rose in me, but so did sorrow. Anger that he could be so blind, sorrow that he could be so cold. I told myself not to cry, but the sting in my eyes betrayed me. By the time I reached my truck, a single tear slid down my cheek. I wiped it away quickly, ashamed, even though no one was there to see it. I sat in the driver's seat for a long moment, gripping the steering wheel, my knuckles white. His words replayed in my head. Worthless old fool. I whispered them aloud, almost testing how they sounded coming from my own lips. The bitterness was sharp, but under it all, something else stirred. A flicker of resolve, faint but steady, like the spark of a flame waiting for oxygen. Lucas thought he had slammed the door for good. What he didn't know was that life had just handed me a chance to prove him wrong in a way he could never have imagined. I drove away from Lucas's mansion with a heaviness in my chest that no words could capture. His rejection had cut deeper than the loss of my job. A job can be replaced, money can be earned again. But a son slamming the door in his father's face and calling him worthless felt like a wound that might never heal. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my fingers ached, yet I kept driving, not even sure where I was headed. After a few miles, I pulled into a quiet park I used to visit with Claire when we were younger. We would sit on the wooden benches, sipping coffee, watching children play and couples walk hand in hand. I parked the truck, stepped out, and sat down on one of those benches. The late afternoon sun hung low, painting the grass gold. I closed my eyes and tried to breathe. That was when I remembered the ticket. That morning, before everything had unraveled, I had checked the numbers on the crumpled lottery slip I had bought the week before. Every single number matched. $8.5 million. At first, I thought it was some mistake. I checked 3 times, heart racing, and finally realized it was real. I had won. But then the call to the office came, the humiliation of being fired, the shame of carrying my box of belongings through the factory gates. In all that chaos, the win had become nothing more than a strange, almost irrelevant fact. My focus had been on survival, on what to do next, and now on Lucas's cruel rejection. As I sat on that bench, I took the ticket from my wallet and stared at it. $8.5 million. It should have been a reason to celebrate, but all I felt was a swirl of grief and confusion. I thought about storming back to Lucas's mansion, waving the ticket in his face and watching the arrogance melt from his expression. I imagined the look of shock, maybe even regret, as he realized the man he had just called worthless was wealthier than he could have ever imagined. But the longer I sat there, the more that idea soured in my mouth. Revenge might bring a moment of satisfaction, but what then? Would I want to live under the same roof as someone who had humiliated me so easily? Would I want to let my son know that the very thing he worshipped, money, was now in my possession, giving him yet another reason to see me as a tool instead of a father? Number. That wasn't what I wanted. Claire's voice echoed in my heart. She had always said that money was a tool, not a purpose, that it should be used to build, not to wound. I remembered her smile, the way she would squeeze my hand when life felt too heavy, and I knew she would have hated the idea of me wasting this chance on bitterness. So I made a decision. I would not tell Lucas, not yet. Instead, I would build something new. I would use this gift not to prove my worth to him, but to prove to myself that his words were wrong. I was not worthless. I had spent my life working hard, raising him, loving my family. That was worth something, even if he refused to see it. I started thinking about Margaret and Daniel. They had always been kind, always treated me with respect. Daniel still called me Uncle Ethan with warmth in his voice, and Margaret never forgot to bring me a slice of pie or a warm meal during the holidays. They had given freely of themselves without expecting anything in return. I decided they would be the first people I would help. I also thought of the factory workers I had left behind. Men and women who had given years of their lives to a company that would throw them aside just as easily as it had thrown me. I thought about the town, the schools falling apart, the library that had closed 2 years ago because of lack of funding. Maybe I could do something about that. Maybe I could take this win and turn it into something bigger than myself. The more I thought about it, the stronger I felt. The pain of Lucas's words was still there, sharp and raw, but underneath it a quiet determination began to grow. I wasn't going to let him define me. I wasn't going to let his coldness decide my worth. That evening, I drove back to my small house, sat at the kitchen table, and began to write a plan. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. I wrote down the debts I needed to clear, the repairs my home desperately required, and the investments I could make to ensure stability. Then I made a second list. People I wanted to help, projects I wanted to support, ways I could give back. By the time I set the pen down, my chest felt lighter. The shame that had weighed me down all day began to lift. For the first time in years, I felt something close to hope. Not because of the money alone, but because I had a choice. I didn't have to beg at the doorstep of a son who despised me. I didn't have to accept his definition of my worth. I had the power to create something new, to live a life of dignity and purpose. The next morning, I cashed the ticket. As the bank clerk confirmed the numbers and the transfer was set in motion, I felt a steady calm wash over me. I walked out of that building not as the man Lucas had mocked, but as a man ready to prove through action, not anger, that true worth comes from how you live, not how others judge you. And though Lucas didn't know it yet, the day would come when he would see exactly what kind of man his father really was. 1 week later, I stood in front of a mirror, adjusting the collar of a suit I had bought the day before. It wasn't flashy, but it was sharp and well-fitted. the kind of suit that made me stand taller. For years, I had worn factory uniforms and work boots, clothes that carried the smell of grease and sweat. Now, I looked like a man reborn, not because of the fabric on my shoulders, but because of the resolve in my heart. That evening, the town was hosting a charity gala at the Civic Center. The event was aimed at raising funds for the local schools, which had been struggling for years. I had donated anonymously just days before, enough to cover the entire campaign goal and more. It was my way of starting to build something better, something Claire would have been proud of. As I walked into the brightly lit hall, I felt eyes turning toward me. Some faces lit with surprise, others with curiosity. Many of the men and women there remembered me only as a factory supervisor, quiet, hardworking, unremarkable in wealth or status. Now I was being introduced by the host as the benefactor who had transformed the future of the town's education system. The microphone was handed to me. My hands trembled slightly as I took it, but my voice held steady. "Thank you," I began, scanning the crowd. "I never imagined I would stand here one day, speaking to all of you like this. For most of my life, I was just a man working shifts at the factory, coming home tired, trying to provide for my family. I wasn't rich, I wasn't powerful, but I believed in hard work, and I believed in love." I paused, letting the weight of the words settle. This town gave me a home, friends, neighbors who cared. And it gave me a family. I may not have much left in terms of blood ties, but I still believe family is more than who shares your name. It's who stands by you when times are hard. That's why I made this donation. The children in this community deserve better. They deserve schools that inspire them, teachers who have the resources to succeed, and a future filled with opportunity. Applause rose from the audience. I caught sight of Margaret and Daniel near the front, their faces glowing with pride. I felt a surge of warmth in my chest. For the first time in years, I felt truly seen, not as a laborer, not as a cast-off worker, but as a man whose choices mattered. And then, in the back of the hall, I saw him. Lucas. He had come with a few of his business associates, likely drawn by the event's prestige and networking opportunities. He was dressed impeccably as always, his hair slicked back, his expression confident. But when his eyes landed on me, standing at the podium, something shifted. The confidence faltered. His mouth opened slightly as though he couldn't quite process what he was seeing. The host continued, announcing me as the donor who had given millions to secure the future of the schools. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Heads turned. Some clapped louder, others whispered in awe. I felt the moment hang in the air, charged with a mix of pride, vindication, and sorrow. I looked directly at Lucas, our eyes locked. For a second the room faded away and it was just the two of us, father and son, bound by blood but separated by choices. He looked stunned, even shaken, as if the foundation beneath him had cracked. I finished my speech with one final message. Worth is not measured by how much money you make or how many walls you build around yourself. Worth is measured by what you give, by the love you show, by the lives you touch. That is what truly defines a man. The hall erupted in applause. I handed the microphone back and stepped down, my heart pounding. As I walked toward Margaret and Daniel, people reached out to shake my hand, to thank me, to pat my shoulder. Each gesture chipped away at the pain Lucas had left in me. When I finally reached the exit, Lucas intercepted me. His face was pale, his confident mask cracked. "Dad," he said, almost in a whisper, "I didn't know." "Why didn't you tell me?" I looked at him calmly. "Because I wanted you to see me for who I am, not for what I have. And you showed me exactly what I needed to see." He opened his mouth to speak again, but I raised a hand to stop him. "This isn't about you, Lucas. Not anymore. This is about living with dignity, about building something good. That's the life I've chosen. You made your choice when you closed that door in my face. For the first time, I saw uncertainty in his eyes, a crack in the wall of arrogance. He wanted to say more, but I walked past him, my head high, my heart steady. As I stepped outside into the cool night air, I felt lighter than I had in years. I had not only revealed my fortune, but had done so in a way that honored who I was and who Claire had believed me to be. The boy who had mocked me as worthless now saw me standing tall, not because of wealth alone, but because of the strength to rise above his scorn. The night sky stretched wide above me. For the first time since Claire's passing, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. After the gala, I returned home to my small house, the one with the creaking porch and fading paint, but it felt different now. For years, I had walked through that front door carrying the weight of exhaustion and worry. That night, I walked in with a sense of clarity. I knew where I stood in the world, and I knew what I wanted to do with the time I had left. The next morning, I called Margaret and Daniel and invited them over. When they arrived, Daniel greeted me with the same warmth he always had, calling out, "Uncle Ethan," before wrapping me in a hug. Margaret placed a casserole on the counter, her way of showing care. They had no idea of the decision I had made until I sat them down at the kitchen table and told them I wanted to help secure Daniel's future and make Margaret's life easier. At first, Margaret resisted. She shook her head and said, "Ethan, you've always given more than you should. You don't have to do this," but I looked her in the eyes and answered, "I do have to. Because family takes care of one. Another, you were there for me when I had nothing. This isn't charity, this is love." Tears welled in her eyes and she finally nodded, her hand gripping mine tightly. Over the following weeks, I began putting my plans into action. I funded scholarships at the local high school, helped reopen the library, and contributed to repairing the community center. Each time I saw a child smiling with a new backpack or a teacher relieved to have supplies, I felt the pieces of my heart knitting back together. I was no longer the man who had been thrown away by a company or rejected by his son. I was a man building a legacy worth more than any mansion or luxury car. As for Lucas, word spread quickly about the donation and my new position in the community. He reached out several times, first with short messages asking to talk, then with longer calls where his voice carried a nervous edge. I ignored them at first, not out of cruelty, but because I needed space. I needed to be sure that if I ever spoke to him again, it would be from a place of strength, not weakness. Eventually, I agreed to meet him. We sat across from each other in a quiet diner, the clink of coffee cups filling the silence. He looked different, less sure of himself, almost humbled. "Dad," he began, "I made a mistake. I was cruel. I let pride blind me." I studied him carefully. For the first time in a long while, I saw the boy I had raised, not the hardened man who had slammed the door in my face. "Lucas," I said, "I don't need an apology for the money or the house. What I needed was respect, the kind a son should give his father, no matter the circumstances. You chose to throw me away when I needed you most. That cannot be undone with words." He lowered his head, shame crossing his face. "I know. I just want another chance." I leaned back in my seat and took a sip of coffee. "Another chance doesn't come from me. It comes from how you choose to live. If you want to rebuild what we had, you'll need to show me, not tell me, and it won't be easy." He nodded silently, and I left it at that. The future of our relationship was uncertain, but for the first time, I didn't feel desperate for his approval. I had already found my worth, and it was not tied to his recognition. Life settled into a rhythm. I repaired the old house but kept it modest, refusing to trade it for luxury. I preferred the creaking porch and the tulip bed Claire once tended. It reminded me of where I came from and who I had always been. On weekends, I spent time with Margaret and Daniel, laughing, sharing meals, and feeling the warmth of family that never turned me away. As I looked back on the whirlwind of those weeks, I realized something important. Losing my job had not been the end of my life. Being rejected by my son had not defined me. Winning the lottery had not saved me. What saved me was the choice to stand up, to build something good, to believe in myself when others refused. The day Lucas slammed that door in my face, I thought I had lost everything. In truth, it was the day I was freed from the need for his approval. It was the day I began to live for something greater than pride or wealth. Now, when I walk through town and see the library's doors open, when I pass children running with new books in their arms, when I hear teachers talk about hope for the future, I know the truth. My worth was never defined by a paycheck or by my son's judgment. It was defined by the love I gave, the sacrifices I made, and the lives I touched. And that is the lesson I carry with me. Dignity does not come from what others say about you. It comes from the way you choose to live, even when the world tries to break you down. That was the day I learned the hardest truth of all. Sometimes the people you love the most will let you down, but that does not mean you are worthless. It means you have to find your strength, stand tall, and live with dignity no matter who tries to tear you down. If this story touched you, let me know what you think in the comments. Have you ever been underestimated or rejected, only to find your true worth later? Share your story. I'd love to hear it. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a like. Share it with someone who might need the message, and subscribe to the channel for more stories that will move your heart and keep you thinking long after the video ends. Because in the end, every story has the power to remind us that we are stronger, braver, and more worthy than we sometimes believe.